Good afternoon, everybody. This is Andy Weinstein from ISS Group. I see there's still people signing on to the presentation. We had almost 40 people register for today's presentation, which is just terrific. So let's just give everybody another minute. We have a whole bunch of material to present, so I'm not going to wait too long, but let's just give everybody one more minute to log in. And then we'll go. It looks like we have about 23 people so far logged in, so it looks like we're getting there. So please give everybody just a few more seconds here. Okay, I think we're going to begin. Once again, my name is Andy Weinstein. Thank you so much for attending today's iVoucher Solution Overview webinar, subtitled Touchless Invoice Processing. We had a whole lot of people register for today's webinar. We appreciate that, and thank you all very, very much. Probably our largest registration we've had to date. We've been running these webinars for many, many, many years. So we do appreciate everybody taking the time. Thank you so much. I only have a handful of slides here. I'm going to try to run through my slides in just a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to hand it over to Sean Brown, one of our guest speakers from Somero Enterprises, and then we'll move from there. So today's agenda is I'm just going to give a brief introduction and just touch upon some promotions that we're offering in 2020. Then I'm going to hand it over to Sean Brown to go through a case study of the iVoucher implementation at Somero. Sean will then hand it over to Milan Agti. I'll introduce Milan a bit later, who's going to provide an overview of the iVoucher solution and a brief demonstration. And then assuming how much time we have left, hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&As and to review the promotions once again. So that's today's agenda. We have a lot of material to cover in very limited time. Again, because we have a whole lot of folks on today's session, some already ISS Group clients, some not, I thought I needed to just display this screen here. ISS Group has been in business for 34 years. We've been in business a long time. I was one of the founders of ISS Group. As you can see, for the first 14 years of our existence, we sold and implemented various solutions. Very specifically, in the mid-90s, we were a QAD reseller. We no longer sell QAD. We stopped selling QAD in 2000. We are now a partner with a Strategic Information Group, SIG, who is, I believe, on the call today as well, and we thank them for attending. And so if there's any QAD consulting work that needs to be done, things like this, SIG is our partner. We have provided solutions and services to well over 300 QAD user organizations since our introduction into the QAD community back in 1995. And today we call ourselves a provider of procure-to-pay and business process improvement solutions exclusively to the QAD user community. So that's pretty important. We live and breathe in the QAD user community. Our solutions include these 5 solutions. I approve, I purchase, I voucher, I quote, and I manage POs. We don't have time to walk through each one of these, of course, today. Today we're going to be focusing on the iVoucher solution, which is a supplier invoice reconciliation / approval solution. The primary objective of all of our solutions is to improve the flow and control of QAD-related business processes that require one or more approvals prior to performing an action. In this case, the action is to create a voucher inside of QAD upon the invoice approval. Now, that invoice may be approved programmatically if it matches up with the purchase order and receipts, and that's the primary objective, to get it to be touchless. And we're going to talk a whole lot more about that today. But if it's not programmatically approved because it didn't match the PO for some reason or another, then it will be routed through a workflow process for approvals. And then again, upon final approval, the action would be to create that voucher inside of QAD. All of our solutions integrate with QAD out of the box. The only solution that we're still working on the integration is the iManage POs solution, which again is not really pertinent to today's conversation. A couple of promotions that we're offering for 2020. Again, I'll circle back around on these, hopefully at the end of today's session if we have time. We are offering 3 free months of invoice processing, up to 1,000 invoices per month. And we're also offering a free, what we call health check of your current AP process. And the deliverable of that health check would be a cost per invoice calculation, as well as a lost payment discount analysis. And again, we'll talk about that more later. So again, I know I ran through these slides. I didn't certainly give a whole lot about ISS Group and our solutions, so please visit our website at www.issgroup.net or .com. Either one will work to learn more about us and our solutions. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our special guest, Sean Brown. Sean is muted at the moment, so let me unmute Sean. And Sean is going to tell us a little bit about the iVoucher implementation at Somero Enterprises. Sean, can you hear me?
Yes, Andy, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Brown. I'm the Global IT Manager at Somero Enterprises. And first, before we start, if you hear my wife or dog in the background, I do apologize. I'm living in post-COVID right now and working from the house. Andy, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, I'll hit the slides as you just tell me to go to the next slide.
Oh, perfect. Sounds good. Sounds good. So I'm partly here today to speak on the iVoucher solution. But before I do that, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on who Somero Enterprises is and what we do. So we basically build machines that screed concrete. And 5 years ago, before I joined the company, I didn't know what that was. Easiest way I can describe it is if you walk into like a Walmart or a Home Depot or Lowe's, you notice the floors are really flat, really level. We build the machines that help level that concrete. Now, if you could walk into a retailer that has really wavy floors, that was our competitors. That was not us. I just wanted to All right, next slide, Andy.
Yeah.
All right, so our current environment is we are running a QAD 2011 SE. The average number of invoices we have pre and post iVoucher was almost 1,900. We started with iVoucher in October 2016. At the time we started, the current AP staff that we had in place doing nothing but paying invoices was 3 full-time employees. We have, as of 2020, we will have 1 full-time employee that does AP as well as value added. Before we go on to the next slide, I did want to mention something kind of funny, and it's maybe ironic that I'm sitting here talking today about on behalf of Millen and Andy, because during this process, I was probably the biggest pessimist during the whole thing, because I'd come from another environment and implemented another solution. And my experience, based on the 2 years that I worked on that process, that I didn't believe there was really a true AP automation system that would work with QAD, given our current environment. So as soon as I joined Somero, everybody in the AP department was really excited that I knew QAD. And the very first questions was, what do you know about AP automation? And based on my previous experience, I didn't have a lot of good things to say about it. Before we go on to the next slide, that's over what you'll see over the next few slides. I can kind of explain and show you how my outlook changed during that process. Andy, could you go to the next slide, please? So one thing that we were able to do with this automation process, we were able to process large invoices. Our general size on our invoices, why the volume might not be that high, some of the actual pages on the invoices were up to 60 to 70 to 80 pages long. So based on 10 to 12 items per page, they would be 800 items plus on our POs. And that's important because we are still manufacturing. We do all manufacturing. Well, I say we're manufacturing. We do assembly and buy from local resellers to assemble our products in the U.S. So that's why we have such high volumes on our PO lines. One thing that we noticed during this after post-implementation, we reduced the time it took to enter these invoices in QAD. It went from taking a 80-page invoice, something that we'd have people doing there full-time, several hours just to do one. It was basically all automated at that process. We turned our AP, when I first touched base, we had 3 people in AP. Now we have 1. We turned those others into business partners. We got them doing other things to work more accounting basis, which was more rewarding for them because then they didn't have people trying to chase down checks, trying to chase down status on suppliers. They could start being a business partner. And that made our overall business happy. That made them happy as well. And then a couple other things that we got during the process, we reduced the time to reconcile invoices from our PO to our receipt. And what that means is we would have, pre-implementation, we would have suppliers constantly calling us and say, hey, what's the status on my invoice right now? We have the other effect now. We are actually processing the invoices within easy access before the goods are received into our system. So while it's a complete 180 on what we had, now we're chasing down suppliers and say, why'd you send us an invoice when we don't have goods yet? And then that in turn improves the times on payments. We've recognized issues that we've had with discount calculations, and we're able to take more advantages of the discounts that we weren't able to take care of before. And finally, we have reduced the elimination of lost invoices through the use of electronic invoicing process. So now what happens is all through the entire process, our suppliers email easy access or iVoucher directly. And then that, Andy, would you go to the next slide, please? Get ahead of myself. That actually goes through an OCR process. And what that OCR is, just a data collection. It just takes the invoice, scans it, and automatically pre-populates that into certain fields based on basically an AI that's running in the background. And what we've noticed is that during this process, like I said, we're able to recognize invoices that are coming in before we receive goods. That also makes us more efficient on how to calculate discounts, and even when that time clock really starts on the discount. We've been able to fine-tune our process a lot because of this. And this next bullet point was part of the reason that I was so skeptical on the process. For those of you that know QAD, QAD's consignment module is not the best, especially around POs and suppliers. We did probably 60–70% of our businesses is with supplier consignment. That said, I was really skeptical because of all the bugs within the process that this would even begin to work. You know, that skepticism turned to surprise over time, and I realized how much benefit it really had. So we were able to do a provider of services deployment. That means that we didn't have to take all the initial cost of servers, setup, and everything. We outsourced all that. So a lot of what our AP staff was originally doing was being sent off to somebody else, and that again enabled us to make our AP staff into business partners. And finally, we did configurable rules and approval routing. And this is ironic now because now I don't catch myself going to AP and say, hey, did you pay the supplier? Now they come to me and say, hey, Sean, you need to approve these invoices so we can get them paid. It's, again, a complete 180 on that turnaround as well, which without this system and the process and the approval routings, we could have never had it. The cost, and this was another one of my big obstacles, was when I had looked at other providers, the cost was so substantial that you know, I assumed everybody was like that. This was more cost effective and efficient. And then the implementation time was start to finish about one person on my team, one person on the AP team, and then two to three people within ISS and easy access. So, and that was probably start to finish within less than 30 days, no, less than 90 days. I take that back. It was relatively fast when we were up and running. Training time took us hardly any time, and that enabled an ease of use. And finally, we had a great reduction of paper as well. Now, what that means, so right now, touchless results, so if we take just a step back, an 80-page invoice, that would take you 1 to 2 hours to enter in QAD. Touchless results, some of those actually go completely touchless through the system. That means that that invoice is sent to easy access and ISS. They scan it through an OCR process. There's a perfect three-way match, meaning that everything matches between the PO to the receipt to the invoice, and that goes straight through our system, creates a payable. That right now on the PO process, we're at about 62% completely touchless. That means that there's no intervention whatsoever. And that again goes back to the value added that we've had during this process. Andy, could you go next one? So some of the benefits we've seen a significant improvement in the AP resources time savings. We've had a reduction in paper costs, improvement in payment discounts, and reduction of lost invoices. And we have improved the relationship with suppliers. Those probably the improvement on AP resources, the discounts, and the relationship with the suppliers are the big three for us, because we make our employees happy, we make our suppliers happy, and that gives an overall better relationship. Because when there are times are tough, or when you need to renegotiate a price, because if your supplier's happy and you keep them up to date on everything, then they're willing to work with you a lot more. And then finally, what we did over time is we created a virtual desktop. And Andy, could you go to the next one? So, and what that means was, when I would 4 years ago, before easy access, this is how our average AP person looked. That was their desktop. It was piled with paperwork all around, all invoices. Their phones would be ringing off the hook, and everybody was following up, trying to figure out when they got paid. Now, when I go into that one person's AP desktop now, it's completely bare. It's all virtualized. It's all within a virtual desktop, and that's what they work off of. That's what she works off of every day long, all day. You know, and ultimately she's a lot happier. So that's really all I have. I think that's my last slide. Thanks.
It is. It is, Sean. That was terrific. Thank you so much. We appreciate Sean making time today. Sean has been going through some problems with his systems over the past few days. He was hit with a ransomware attack, and he's been dealing with that. So we really appreciate Sean making the time today. Thank you, Sean. That was terrific. I'm just going to put you back on mute.
Okay.
Okay, terrific. So again, I only have one or two more slides here, and then I'm going to hand it over to Milan Agti. Again, today we're going to be talking about more about iVoucher. I'm not going to walk through each one of these bullet points, but I do want to say iVoucher is a cloud-based, it's hosted invoice reconciliation solution developed by a company called Easy Access and resold by ISS Group. So we renamed it iVoucher to fit into our naming convention. I approve, I purchase, et cetera, I quote, and that's where the name iVoucher comes from. But we're not the developer of iVoucher. We have developed a number of those other solutions like I purchase and I approve, but iVoucher is a third-party product that we resell. And what's most important, of course, about this slide here is what I have in big, bold, red letters, and that is the functionality of what we call line item pairing and matching. And that's really what lends itself to get to that 62% touchless invoice processing rate that Sean mentioned, and Milan is going to go through that in a lot more detail. So let me just tell you real quick who Easy Access is. Easy Access was founded way back in the beginning of the 2000s. It was founded and run by a gentleman by the name of Milan Agti. Milan is on the phone with us here, and I will be handing the slides and the presentation over to Milan in a minute. These are just some of the clients that Easy Access has in the QAD community. Many of these clients are mutual clients of ISS Group as well, such as Yamaha and SMR, Med Robotics, Heron Therapeutics, and of course Somero, etc. So Milan has probably about a dozen to a dozen and a half implementations of the Easy Access AP automation solution in the QAD community, and then probably another 3 or 4 dozen implementations for other ERP solutions such as JD Edwards and SAP and others. Their business is offering solutions and services to improve the AP process. So that's what Easy Access does. We put it into our portfolio because it fit into the procure to pay solution suite. Okay. So again, without further ado, I am going to now introduce my colleague Milan Agti, and Milan is going to walk through a brief PowerPoint presentation and then going to perform a demonstration of the iVoucher solution. So Milan, can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, I can. Andy, can you hear me?
I can. Let me just hand the presentation to you.
All right, let me pull up mine. Can you see this PowerPoint?
Not yet.
Not yet. Do I have to hit share screen or something?
Right.
Where the heck is this? Webcam.
Andy, I think you sent it to me instead.
Did I?
Okay, can you try again?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Okay, wonderful.
Okay, now we can see it. Yes.
All right, let me put it onto full screen mode here. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Full screen. Okay, excellent. Hello, everybody. My name is Milan Agti, and I am with Easy Access, which is a company that we only specialize in building an accounts payable automation solution, and worked closely with ISS Group on many mutual clients, all in the QAD space. What I'm going to show you is a few slides that will give you a flavor for how is the solution architected and how do the components of the solution work. And also, if you are interested in AP automation, just a few-minute overview of what does that really mean and what are the components that you should be looking at. So all of that information will be in these PowerPoint slides. And then I'm going to switch over to actually the site itself and show you that if you were a buyer, for example, what would be the experience? And if you were the AP manager, what would be the experience? So the hope would be at the end of this, you all would be quite knowledgeable about what are the components of AP automation and how do they work together. So if we go into the solution itself, the key element here is QAD is the master repository for everything. So all data starts and ends in QAD. So that is this component on the right-hand side. In the middle is Easy Access, and Easy Access is a solution that combines technology, and it is hosted by us, and it has services. So the objective here being that instead of trying to get you all to buy some software and then learn how to use it, our feeling was you essentially just want an invoice to be processed quickly, meaning if an invoice arrives on one side, you would like the data from that invoice to be captured, you would like it to be compared to all of the rules that you have, and you would want it to end up in QAD if it meets all of your rules and get vouchered there. And if you didn't have to have your people do all of this work and in a sense have it magically occur, that would be the best. So that indeed is the thought process behind what Easy Access does. And the way we refine it or define it is that that invoice should go in a touchless basis. And in Somero's case, 62% of their invoices do go in touchless, which if you do the math on that, if 50% of your invoices go in touchless, then only half the invoices need to be touched and your throughput doubles, which means you can do the work with half the people. So with that in mind, this central component, which is the Easy Access part that is hosted by us, has two main parts to it. One is the data capture module, and that uses a technology called optical character recognition, and I will show you how that works. And then there is a workflow, and the workflow essentially is a website. And this website comes pre-configured with just about every rule that any client has ever asked for. And then before it is set up, we go over that with each client. And so the rules are configured specifically to you so that each individual website is set up specifically for a client. And configurable rules could be if you have an additional charge like freight on an invoice and that charge was not on your purchase order, what happens? Or you might say as long as it is less than $50 or less than 1% of the PO price, let it go through, otherwise stop it. So that would be a rule that would be specific to your situation. So all of that is built into the workflow system. And over on the left-hand side, architecturally is the vendor who are sending their invoices. And the invoices can either come in by email, and they can come in by email either to an email box you all have that gets forwarded to us, or to an email box that we set up, and the vendors will directly send it to us. It can come in by paper mail. Again, it can come to you. At the end of the day, you open your mail, take out all the contents, scan them into two piles, single page and multiple page, and we give you a spot where you drag and drop it, and you are done, and we take over from there. Or we can set up a PO box for you here in South Bend, Indiana, where we are located, and the mail comes directly there, and your people don't even have to touch the mail. And finally, if you have client or vendors who can submit an electronic file, EDI or XML or anything like that, we can receive that too. So architecturally, the middle section is what we are operating. It is getting invoices from either the vendor or from you, and it is getting refreshed data from QAD, which allows the system to have all of the relevant information, such as the vendors, vendor numbers, their open purchase orders, and so forth. So that is how it is architecturally constructed. And since you don't have to buy any hardware or software, essentially think of easy access sitting on top of QAD, so you're using all of the QAD functionality without any additional acquisitions. What is the key to actually getting automation to work? And we feel it is this acronym TRM. T being touchless, R being if an invoice has to be touched, then the person doing the touching should very quickly, very rapidly be able to fix whatever the problem is or to approve the invoice. And lastly, use metrics to figure out what exactly is the reason that that invoice is not going through touchless, or that it is taking too much time to get fixed, and then go back in and fix it. So it's an iterative process. When clients first come to us, their touchless rate is seldom over 20%. And then we run the metrics to see why. And there are really only two reasons. One is either the vendor is ignoring your purchase order and putting in stuff that's not on the purchase order, or your buyers are not creating purchase orders correctly. The net result of which is the invoice doesn't agree with the purchase order and it gets stuck. Well, you run metrics and you can start seeing volumes on which vendors' invoices are failing, why are they failing, and you go back in and figure out the reason, correct it one large vendor at a time, and that is actually how the whole process works. So it's an iterative process, but the idea is to get you up to over 70%. And it takes a few months, but if you do that, that is indeed what happens. And if you hit 70% or more, you can do the work with 1/3 or 1/4 of the staff that you're doing right now, and that's another huge benefit. So how does the data capture element work? So the invoices come in either as paper or as images, and then they are scanned if they were paper, and then they run through this technology called optical character recognition. I'm sure a lot of you have heard what it is, but let me explain to you what is so unique about ours. So what you're looking here is the end result of doing the OCR. So the image of the invoice goes through this program, and before the image is sent in, we will segregate the images so that each image has only one invoice. Now, it could have many pages. As Sean mentioned, their invoices could have 16, 18 pages with many, many lines. That doesn't matter, but each image is only a single invoice. It goes through the system reads everything that it is supposed to read, and then it comes onto the screen that we are looking at that we call verification, and we have a person looking at every single invoice. What it is doing here on the right-hand side is it is capturing the header and the footer fields that you want to get captured. So invoice number, invoice date, PO number, and so forth. And on the bottom, it is capturing the line items that you want to get captured, which are essentially part number, description, quantity shipped, and so forth. And it uses a traffic signal indicator to tell the user. So a green is that the system found it, read it, and has picked it up. And a yellow is it found it, but it is not sure. And a red is it didn't find. Now, what is key about our system is that most OCR systems do what's called zone reading. And zone reading means you pick up this Owens and Minor invoice and you draw a box around the invoice number. So then the system remembers that the invoice number field is 2 inches from the top and 2.5 inches from the right-hand side, and that is what is invoice number. So it picks it up and it puts it here. Well, as you can imagine, that is a very laborious process that you have to zone read and teach the system for every single vendor. But what is worse yet is if you scan this invoice and it is not exactly vertical and it's slightly crooked or at an angle, that zone is no longer where it was expecting to be, and so the invoice number wouldn't be correctly read. What our system does is it does what's called, it uses tags. And tags means it is reading the word. So it is reading the word invoice number, and it doesn't matter where that word is on the page. It'll then look for an alphanumeric field either right next to it or right below it, and that would be the invoice number. And then the system, we can teach it to say, look for invoice number, look for other combinations like invoice NO, INV NO, INV pound. There are 8 or 9 words that you teach it looking for invoice number, and if it finds that anywhere, it reads it. That is the key for having very, very fast and accurate reading. And as you can look at this invoice, this was the end result, and the boxes show you where it read it. So if it didn't read something like in this case, it couldn't find the word freight or any of the other tags that we have given it, like shipping, handling, transportation. So it is saying, I didn't find that anywhere. So now our user would go in and confirm that the vendor has not used a really unique word like, I don't know, movement or something like that. And if it hasn't, then you can tell the system you're right, and then this OK button comes on and it moves forward. So that is what OCR reading does. Let me very quickly then now get into, now that the system has read the invoice, what happens next? The invoice image and the data that was captured now gets pulled into the workflow system, and there is a different workflow for PO versus non-PO invoices. So in the PO invoices, what is key is that matching takes place. But before matching can take place, there is a concept called pairing, which needs to take place. What is pairing? So pairing is the process of identifying which line on the PO is being billed on that invoice. Because unless you pair an invoice, matching cannot work. So for example, oops, if you oops, I'm going in the wrong direction here, just a moment. Okay, here. On the right-hand side, this is an image of the invoice, and on the left-hand side is the purchase order. This is, in fact, like a Somero purchase order where there are 40 lines or more on that purchase order. Here's an invoice with about 8 or 9 lines. If you were doing this manually, you would have to figure out this first line, which is the price of $9.69 with this item code, where is it on this PO? So a human would have gone in and looked at the part number and scanned all of the part numbers till they found it, or look at the unit price, and then they would have said, oh, this first invoice line is actually PO line 226. So then they would have clicked that line and then it would have moved forward. But the vendors, while they do put in the PO number, they never put in the PO line number. So even though you might have a very elaborate OCR system, it's picked all of this up, but if it doesn't automatically pair it, then the user still has to come in and touch the invoice and pair every single line on every single invoice. Well, that is not touchless. So we have built in an algorithm which does what a human would do. And so the end result of that would be this screenshot where this is, for example, a 2-line invoice. The lower section is the invoices, and the upper section is the purchase order, which has 7 lines. It paired up and it used the part number to determine that the first line on the invoice was actually PO line number 2, and the second one was PO line number 3. It paired it and it did the matching, and this invoice would have then gone through touchless. So that is one of the very, very key elements that nobody else has that our system does, which is the ability to do pairing, which in turn then leads to how touchless processing works. I've gone through a lot very quickly. Suffice it to say, what I was trying to tell you is, in order for this thing to work accurately and fast, the key is TRM, with T being the touchless. So now let me show you how does this thing actually work in practice. I've switched over to the demo site. Andy, can you see the site?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this would be a site for for each client. And when a client would log in, or one of their users would log in, based on their user profile, they could see and do either less or more. So I'm going to first log in as Karen Massico, who is a buyer, and explain to you what would happen when she logged into this. One thing that is out here is you see in the login screen, there's a tenant. And what a tenant means is that if you have multiple domains in your QAD environment, we mimic it, we call it tenants. And this way you can segregate those domains and you can have different rules, you can have different vendor numbers, you can have everything different, for each tenant. So here, coming back to Karen, she lands, or every user lands on a page called My Tasks. And in this My Tasks page, it is segregated into different components, but only the components and the ribbons that Karen would need to do something would show up. So since Karen is a buyer, the only invoices she will touch are PO invoices. And this thing is saying that there are 2 PO invoices that have been directed to her. One of those invoices is from a vendor, which is a priority vendor, which you can label, maybe that vendor gives you a discount, so that, is sort of shown separately. So when an invoice gets directed to a person on a daily basis, they will get an email telling them that a new invoice has been directed and they need to do something about it. So when she comes here, if she clicks the view button, what this does is it gives you an overview of there's one invoice from Auto Value and one from Motion Industries. And the reason why it is stuck, Motion Industries has a price variance and the other one has an additional charge. So now when Karen logs in, she needs to decide what to do here. She can either view the invoice or she can click the details button. And when she clicks that, the screen that opens up is the invoice detail page that has an electronic rendition of all of the data on the invoice. So the top section is, header information, the name of vendor, vendor number, and so forth. And the bottom section is the invoice. So this is a single invoice with one-line invoice for $120. The middle section, though, is the key. Remember, we said if it's not touchless and it gets stuck, make it so that it is easy for the person fixing it to figure out what the problem is. So the system is telling Karen, this invoice, it happens to be a one-line invoice, but it is telling you on PO line 1, the problem is that there's a price variance. The amount being invoiced, which is $15, is either more or less than your PO price of $12.68. So right there, you know what is the problem. So now Karen can click the view invoice button and this pulls up an image of the invoice. So there's your $15 unit price. And if Karen wants to see, well, what did the PO actually look like? If she clicks the update button, you get another screen which has a split that says that this was a 2-line purchase order. The first line was being billed, and you can see that the first line, the PO price is $12.68, the invoice price is $15. So now Karen has all the information that she needs to make a decision. So let's say her decision is that short pay the invoice because the PO price is correct. She can go into this middle section, into the notes thing, and say, put in the comment, come into this comment section, select the person. In this case, she wants it to go back to AP, and then hit the email thing. If she hits this, this comment will get recorded with today's date and time, her name, and now this invoice will leave her queue, get directed to AP. AP now has the instructions and an audit trail of who told them to short pay the invoice. AP can then go in and adjust the price on the invoice to short pay it and hit the post button, and this invoice will now get transmitted to QAD and gets paid for the amount. So this is how quickly a person can, fix the invoice if it gets stuck. If you go to the other one, same concept. This is from Auto Value of Houghton, and you can see it's been directed. This one is that this invoice has an additional charge that happened to be tax. So if you view the invoice, here it is for charge, it is the tax. If you want to look at what the purchase order, single line purchase order, no tax. So one of the things that we did do is we have the ability while doing the OCR to track things like tax and freight, and then we put them in a separate hold category. So you could have separate rules for tax and a separate rule for freight so that those invoices are handled differently. So in the interest of time, I'm going to stop on the PO side here, but what I showed you was if PO invoices, if they had a problem, and there are about 10 different hold categories that they can go into, so you can subcategorize it and make it simple for people to fix the problem. It goes in there with what is the problem, and the person can decide on how to fix it. They can put in their comment and direct it back. Let me now log out and log back in as an AP administrator. And show you what else they can look at. So when you log in as an AP administrator, firstly, you can see that there are a whole lot of reports you can look at. But if I go to the My Tasks page, now you can see there are a lot more ribbons in here, including the ribbon on the right-hand side, which shows all the tasks. So it says there are 3 invoices in ready to export, and after they're exported, they go into a waiting confirmation. We get a confirmation back from QAD that they are vouchered. They get posted here. If for some reason it failed to import, it is tracked here. Well, let's look at the invoices that are ready to export. So there are 3 invoices here that were ready to export. If I clicked on the first one, same concept, electronic information at the top, single line invoice, and as you can see, this came in, it was completely matched, went ready to export. If we click the update button, we can see this was a single line PO, single line invoice, and everything matched up. So this invoice went ready to export. What are some of the things it looked at? Well, firstly, this invoice was tagged with PO line 1. The next thing it looked at that what was the quantity received? You can see that the quantity received was 407, even though the quantity ordered was 500. But the billed quantity is also 407, so the quantity received and the quantity billed is correct. Here is the receipt date, and here is the receiver number. So in addition to doing a price check, the system also did a receipt check from the 3-way side, and it picked up what was the receiver number that needs to be cleaned up with this invoice and what is the quantity. So now when this invoice goes into QAD, not only is it matched, but it also goes in and cleans up your received but not invoiced components so that this particular record is completely cleaned out even in QAD. So this is a case of a single line invoice and a single line purchase order, which went through Touchless. I go to the next invoice. This is a case of a 2-line invoice and a 2-line purchase order. And here again, the quantity orders ordered were 2. It's got the unit prices that match up to 29,169. Got the receipt number that matches up, receipt date and quantity received. So everything is matched up. It shows you against the receiver numbers. So here's a multiple line invoice and a multiple line purchase order that went through Touchless. Let's go to the next invoice. This is a multiple line purchase order, but only a single line invoice. Again, same concept. It was able to, by looking at different things, the product number, the part number didn't match up. So it went in and looked at the unit price, went into the quantity received, and found out that even though there's a multiple match on the unit price, there's a unique match on the quantity ordered and the quantity received. So it picked up that in the pairing process and picked it up and sent it out. So here's another example of how a PO invoice went through Touchless. Non-PO invoices have the same process, and a non-PO invoice you also have the ability to do the GL coding. So here's a non-PO invoice, and same concept, all of the information is on the top, but in the middle is the way that your GL codes are set up, and you can restrict a person, to do their GL coding, and up here it tells you what was GL coded. So the GL coding can be done either by the approver or by the person who is, forwarding it. You can set up approval groups, and you can put people with different dollar limits in the approval groups, so an invoice can be directed to a particular approval group, such as maintenance. It can go to the person who has the lowest approval threshold and move forward. So the system is automatically routing the invoices forward for approvals. Lastly, let me just show you, out of all of the reports, one of the reports that is of great interest to people is the accrual report. And this one is, if your controller comes in at the end of the month, wants to see how many invoices are sitting in different people's desks that probably need to be accrued, you can go in here, you can run a report, you can filter it by different hold statuses, and get the results. And every report in the system that is out here can get exported to Excel, so you can then go back in and run your accruals. So if I were to just sort of summarize what were the conclusions and everything else. So from an educational perspective, which is one of the things we wanted to teach the group on the call today, is you should use this TRM concept to improve the efficiency of your solution so that more and more invoices go through touchless, and if it needs to be touched, it's very rapidly fixed. OCR is how the data is captured. An OCR product which has a tag reading is way better than zone reading. The architecture of the solution should be that it should have very good technology, but it should also have a service component, so you're not spending your time learning how to use software, because you really don't want that. You just want the results. So why spend time learning software, or why spend time having your IT support the software? Don't. You just get the results. And finally, for the concept to work, pairing is an absolutely critical element. The benefits is that with our solution, this is, it's configured, so there is no programming that needs to be done. We just go in and set up the rules that you want, and it is fully integrated with QAD, both the SE and the EE version, and you don't need to buy or learn how to use the software. We do all the work. So with that, Andy, I'm going to turn it back to you, and you can do the conclusions. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain this stuff.
Excellent, Milan. Thank you so much. Terrific. So once again, this was the promotions slide that I showed earlier in our presentation. Again, I just wanted to make sure everybody got a chance to see this. We're offering 3 free months of iVoucher invoice processing for up to 1,000 invoices per month. But probably more important is this free health check analysis that we will provide on your current AP process. So again, the deliverable of that analysis would be a calculation of the average cost per invoice that you're currently incurring in your process, as well as what you're losing in terms of payment discounts. And both of those things, of course, are very important in terms of justifying an AP automation solution. The next slide, I just have 2 more slides here. This slide, this is a health check that we perform on current iVoucher clients. So the health check that I was talking about in the promotions would be for non-users of iVoucher, but once a client starts using iVoucher, we continue to do health checks to determine what this touchless rate is. Okay? And what you see here in this range are clients that are ranging between 12%, and those are obviously newer clients, to clients that have achieved touchless rates of upwards of 76%. So that's obviously huge. Between 7 and 8 out of 10 invoices are going in touchless. That's just a huge, huge savings. If they're not going in touchless, okay, what's the percentage that needed touching? And what are the reasons why they were being held? Okay, and so we of course provide that analysis as well. Okay, so we continue to perform these health checks even after the iVoucher solution is implemented. Just a quick commercial here. We will be holding a number of webinars in July, specifically on July 9th. We'll be holding a webinar on our iPurchase solution and focusing on punch-outs and hosted catalog functionality. And then on July 23rd, we'll be focusing on the budgeting and the MRP Action Center as part of iPurchase. We'll also be holding an iApprove webinar sometime in August. We have, of course, provided a lot of information today. We've just touched the surface. We're sure that there's going to be plenty of questions. So please feel free to request a demonstration of any of our solutions, and we'll be able to really dig down deep into potentially the value that it would give to your organization. And that's just about it for today. So if anybody has any questions, it looks like we have about 3 or 4 minutes. There is a question dialog box as part of the GoToMeeting on the right-hand side. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask, please feel free. Milind, I heard you mentioned that iVoucher integrates with both SE and EE. So that's not a question that we need to answer. But one of the questions that I've received is the timeline, and Sean touched on that, but what's the typical timeline for an implementation? And what are the typical challenges that we face during implementation?
So as Sean had mentioned, 90 days is typically the timeline, and it has 2 components to it. One is talking to the client to get from them what are the rules that they would want, and then the other one is to be building the integration into QAD and testing it, and both of these things can run simultaneously. So 90 days is generally the timeline from start to finish, and that does include training at the very end. Among the challenges, really from the client standpoint, is for the first time they are put into a position saying, or what rule do you want? Because what they find out is that in many instances they have multiple rules depending on who's doing the approving and who's doing the data entry. Also, what happens is that in most clients' cases, since AP is ultimately the person responsible for entering the data in, if any of the people along the way don't do the work that they're supposed to be doing, AP ends up doing it. Well, now the process is being reversed. The process is, if you are the buyer who caused a price variance, you need to figure out what and correct the issue, not AP. This is a huge mindset that AP has to stop hand-holding and to get the person who created the problem to fix it the first time. So, trying to get people to build rules and then changing the mindset, that is, in a sense, where most of the time is spent in the setup.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay. I don't seem to have any. Well, let's see. There's another question here. Yeah. I had some connection issues and were unable to hear the presentation due to breaking up. Is there any way to get the presentation emailed? If we upgrade to the cloud version, does this transfer and work the same? So in terms of the presentation, yes, I will be emailing the presentation out to everybody who registered for today's session, and there will also be a recording of today's webinar available probably in the next few days. In terms of moving to the cloud, Milind, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. Yes, our solution integrates with both the QAD on-premise version as well as the cloud version. So both are well within the scope.
I have a question here. How are the invoices stored, and how can they be accessed for, say, audit purposes?
So the image of the invoice is on the site and it stays there for 6 years. So you can definitely get in there anytime. Some clients, if they have a separate image storage system, then if they like, every day after the invoice has been entered into QAD, we actually send them the image of the invoice along with a few data fields like a vendor number, invoice number, and so forth, so it can get stored there. So the images are always available on our side, and we can send them to you as often as you want, if you want a copy of the image too.
Terrific. Okay, so it looks like we're a minute over our time at this point. So once again, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate you making the time for us today. I'm sure you guys have plenty of questions. Feel free to email me directly. If you'd like to set up a one-on-one demo, please feel free to request that. There's no obligation to buy. We're not high pressure, so please do not hesitate, and please do not hesitate to send me any questions that you may have. Once again, thank you all for your time today, and have a terrific rest of your day.
Thank you.